Hello everyone, welcome to a very special TNM members event with famous singer, activist, writer also now, TM Krishna. And this is a very exclusive event. We're happy to talk to Krishna about a bunch of things, about music, about Ashokan edicts, about social activism and things like that. So join in. We'll take questions towards the end also. So if you've got any questions, all you have to do is just type it into the chat box if required, and depending on time, we'll take it. So welcome, Krishna. How do I introduce you as? You come from a very sort of illustrious family, but that doesn't really weigh heavily on you, right? It's just sort of just something there in the background for you.
I do hope that's true.
Yeah, I think at least from my end, I think that's true. And you do a bunch of things. So if you, we'll talk about them in a while. Tell us about this edict project, because as a historian, I'm very interested in it, and I want to know what got you started off on that.
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you, Narika, and thank you, News Minute, for this opportunity. It's always nice to have a chat with you people. You're doing amazing work, first of all. Thank you for everything that you're doing. So, I mean, to be very honest, like a year ago, year and a half ago, if you'd asked me edicts, I would have known nothing. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, like everybody else, I studied in a textbook where it had this one paragraph where we heard about these things in some stones and pillars. If you went to Sarnath by chance, you could have seen it. One of those things, right? And that's all it was. And it was we were having conversation one day. Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi, just in a conversation, told me, why don't you just look at it again? Just look at it again. It's something you should read. And he was the trigger, to be very honest. So I went back to it, and as you look at the edicts, you realize. What is amazing about it? First, this is a human being. Let's first start there. The person who wrote it is a human being. He is not a deity who's inaccessible, and he's a damaged human being like you and me. Okay, he's not a perfect guy at all. He's not perfect even while the time he was writing the edicts. That's, I think, even more important that we embrace that fact. So here's this very, very troubled human being, and there is this transformation that happens, and then he realizes what's the basis of his public life and personal life. And fundamentally that first raises this whole question of this public and personal. We very conveniently say that certain things are personal, certain things are public, are political. And in his transformation, you see both of them are very fluid. They are moving together. That's amazing. And then what does he speak about? I mean, to speak about ideas of just kingdoms, of equality, of respect for different opinions, different religions, at a time when, we're talking about what, 2,200 years ago, and was something astounding. And I don't know whether it's good or something we should celebrate or we should be worried about, that everything he's written then seems to be relevant as much as it is today as it was then. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's for us to think about. So that's when I said, what can I do? And I thought of this idea of, shall we start making it into musical forms? It's easier said than done. First, I knew nothing about the language, nothing about, it's written, first of all, in so many dialects. In fact, linguists call it Ashokan Prakrit because there are so many variants to that Prakrit, right? So, and it's written in different scripts. So that's when I was introduced to a Buddhist monk, Sharvasti Dhammika, who first picked out 4 edicts on dharma. And he gave it to me, and he said, look at it. And he worked with the text. There are variations. Then I still, it's very interesting, right? This is something that has never gone beyond the written form, honestly. Forget about singing. We've never heard the words said, have we? So then I had a Prakrit scholar, Dr. Naresh Kirti, and we worked on first just getting the sound of the language. I'm still learning. I won't say that I know it. I'm still learning it. Because for a musician, the sound of the language is a very important aspect of the music. So that's how I tumbled into this project, and I'm glad because I think I'm learning so many things. It's the meanings and the meanings within meanings. It's quite astounding, and I think in today's political atmosphere, it's an essential idea. I really want this to go in different languages. It should not just be in Prakrit. I hope to translate it in Tamil, in Hindi, in Bengali, in Marathi, in Bhojpuri, whatever. And I don't own this. Let other artists do it. Do it in hip hop. Do it in rock and roll. Do it in Pare. Do it in Ghana. I think that's the point. The point is, what I've done is just an introduction to a possibility. That's it.
Fantastic. So how's the process like? You spoke a little bit about that, about understanding the language first, and then understanding the sounds of that particular language. So what's the process? Because I think in music that is more, like you said, it's very important. But also sometimes we say music transcends language. So what's that like? That dynamic like?
So my own movement in that idea of semantics and beyond the semantics has been far more. I mean, my position has changed over the last decade. I mean, if you read Southern music and people can ask me questions of things I've written there and say, oh, you're saying this now. So I think I've also traveled in that journey because I see the fact. I mean, I recognize the fact that we are tuned. We are kind of choreographed to associate ourselves with the world through the meaning of a word. So the abstract in a way is kind of moving away from it, but then I can't ignore the dominance of the semantics. So if you take Prakrit, if you take the language, there are three things. One is the meaning, that is the textual meaning, and then there is the abstract even in the textual meaning. We often think that text is one meaning. There are multiple meanings there too, right? So how do you interpret a certain expression? How do you understand it? So there is the abstract in the meaning. And then there is the sound of the language. Many people don't realize speaking a language is a different sound, singing a language is a different sound. Singing a language in different genres are different sounds. Most people think, a lot of people look at people singing a language and say, oh, they got that word wrong. They didn't get the word wrong, they sang the word. So if I sing a word, it's very different from, say, Arivu. If he was going to use the same word in Tamil rap, he will use it very differently. The very intonation, the enunciation will change. So it was a process for me to first get the word. First, how do I say this, right? Then how will that flow with, say, the genre that I'm singing, which is raga-based music? So there may be certain ragas that may not work for it because I have no precedence. The thing is also habit, right? When I have habit and memory, then you and I don't see a problem between the sound of a language and music because you're used to it. Now, when you're not used to it, I have to create memory, to be very clearly, sonic memory, right? So it's hard. So I took a while to just say it. I said it wrong 100 times. Then I had to get on a Zoom call with Naresh and say, Naresh, get this right. And and it's sometimes very difficult to explain a sound. I mean, he would say it easily. I mean, when you hear Buddhist monks, for example, chant Pali, it's actually very difficult to chant it. It sounds like it's easy. It is not. The vowel in the mouth, the way the mouth opens. So it was a journey, and I'm still on the journey. And so I think these are nuances that you grapple with. And remember, this is prose. This is not poetry written for music.
Yeah.
So you can ask me, why do you bother? I mean, I think that's the interesting part of creative endeavors, right? It's not just the politics; it's also the aesthetic possibilities. So it's challenging, but it's great fun.
Fantastic. I think that's also something that appeals to me in a lot of stone because I learned a lot of the Devarams that we learn in Tamil that way.
Correct.
I learned them as poetry rather than song. But then my grandmother sang it as songs.
Yeah.
And that maybe you could tell us a little bit about that transformation from.
Okay, let me tell you one very simple transformation.
If you can sing it also, it'd be fantastic.
I mean, I'll give you a very simple transformation that is necessary for music. Is extension of vowel. Okay. Now, I'll sing a song it's written by Murugan, Perumal Murugan. It's quite popular now. Ni mattume and Nenju Nikkirai. Many people have heard it. Now, it's ni mattume, right? I won't sing it as mattume. Ni mattume. The ma vowel extension is the music in it. So a lot of times, a very important aspect of converting text to music is the possibility of extending. The other thing is the harder sounds, right? Now, tra or ra, where, or patru, for example, like in Tamil, your patru, you won't sing it with such a emphasis on the tr. You will sing it as patru. But if somebody is going to read poetry, they'll say patru, right? The endings also are rarely so sharp in music. They usually meander. Now, every language, by the way, changes as far as this is concerned. The way you say are all different in each language. So if I say it's not the same as saying it's not the same as saying Now, all this is changes when you sing too. So how do you extend an compared to an right?
Yeah.
So that is when you get into the sound of the language. So, languages have a certain, shall we say, sonic rhythm about it. It's actually a rhythm. When you read any language, you can feel a movement, if I say, between the vowel and the consonants and the other nasal apparatus and the vocal apparatus that you use to enunciate it. Malayalam, for example, I've just sung a concert to be broadcast on the 1st of November on Kerala, day Kerala was born. This is Narayana Guru's composition. Now, the use of la, the use of nga, singing ga are very different. So nga is musical, ga is also musical. So, it depends. So, you have to kind of learn it within the language. And, you have to pick on it. So, and it's important that liberty is also there in music, it's important that liberty to move the word is also there in music. Only then the word then becomes something else. When you made that statement that there is meaning beyond the semantic, that happens only when the vowels and syllables and the words themselves move.
Okay. We'll come back to that because I think that's an interesting thing. We have Dhruv here, a TNM member. Dhruv has a question for you. Dhruv?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are you, man?
All good, all good. So, it's interesting that you spoke about your journey in discovering art in what you've produced. But I am very interested to know more about the politics of Buddhism. So I've sort of jotted this down. So is this whole romanticism of Buddhism a reflection of privilege? There is a political that comes in over there. Secondly, as you were discovering Ashoka and as you went through the Edict project, right? What does Ashoka teach us about a certain radicalism in Buddhism? And related to that, I have a third question. Sorry if I'm going on and on. If Tiruma were to meet Ashoka...
I lost you there. Related to that?
Yeah, in relation to that, if Tiruma were to meet Ashoka over the weekend, what would they talk about? Considering what's going on.
Well, the third question should go to Tiruma, not me. I can't.
We'll try and get Tiruma soon. Krishna, are you here?
Yeah, I think the Tiruma did on the kelvi kekkom. But anyway, so of Buddhism. I think both happened, right? Both. There is also a movement to say Buddhism is not this peaceful, lovely idea that is truly radical, that it is within the gamut of what are now called, shall we say, within course, Indic religions, a word that is often being used nowadays. That's also there. Now, I don't think it's necessary to romanticize Buddhism at all. I am not romanticizing Buddhism. Let me be very clear, okay? The one thing that makes Buddhism very important is its fervor for social and political and personal change today in the constructions of society, and not looking out for any other supernatural or non-human practice or being or etc. to enable that. And now that to me is a very important aspect of the Buddhist thought. It's not I'm not even talking about the negation of God, I'm talking about the practicality of today being important for change, whether it is in the collective or whether it is in the individual. That I think was radical, extremely radical, first of all, for its time, when it came. It was extremely radical for its time and for the construction that it created. But it still remains radical because in today's world, we seem to be flipping back to mumbo jumbo. And we're doing it so fast, we don't realize it, right? Now, does that mean Buddhism is like the panacea or the romanticized? No, it is not. There is enough violence in Buddhism. Let's be very clear about it. We have seen in our neighborhood. Now, you can say it's very interesting, isn't it, that we would very easily point out to terrorism as Islamic terrorism, but very rarely we call it to say Buddhist terrorism, do we? Or Hindu terrorism, right? So I would think that the problems are there. We have seen it in Myanmar, we are seeing it in Sri Lanka, we are seeing it not just in physical violence, in thought violence too. So therefore, at no point is this project about romanticizing Buddhism. I think this project, as far as I'm concerned, is about looking, to me the most fascinating aspect is this is completely human, entirely in its process. You're most welcome to disagree with the edicts, by the way. I'm not publishing them so that you can all agree and say, oh wow, Ashoka is this great guy. No. You can say the guy is screwed up, but the fact is he has put it out there for us to reflect upon. Now, as long as that is happening through, I'm fine with, I don't have a problem with anything because I think he is a problematic person. There's no doubt that he's a problematic person. But isn't that what we can actually connect with? That transformations are possible, but after transformations, true, messes are possible, right? And let's also recognize that as much as about my privilege, Ashoka was as privileged as you could think of, right? So now, this is a third question now, or have I passed the first two? I'm kind of confused at this point of time.
You've done two very well.
Okay, thanks. So what would Thiruma and Ashoka talk about? That would be fascinating because, first of all, you could even ask the question, what would Ambedkar and Ashoka talk about too? I would find that also very fascinating to think about, right? Fundamentally, I don't think they'll agree with each other, to be very honest. Because whatever said and done, Ashoka came from privilege. Okay, he never gave up the power of the ruler because if you listen to the voice in the edict, the voice is still the edict voice of the king. It is not the voice of a commoner. I'm just using that, or the everyday person, right? So that cannot be, let's not run away from that fact. But the fact that the privilege remains, yet here is a person in power at a time when power was of a different construction, thinking about the voices of the many. Now, that's the fascinating mold here. Now, so I think Thiruma would probably completely disagree with him and say, who the hell are you to say that we have power?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a very fair question to ask Ashoka. But isn't that the conversation we should be having actually, right? That contestation is the magic.
Ayodhya, Ambedkar and Thiruma and Buddha.
Oh yeah. And I have to tell you, since you asked me the question, I'm quick detour. I know there are people who are upset that I released this project on October 14th. Who said I politicized this project by doing it that way. I was thinking, if I had released it on October 2nd, would anybody have complained? They would have thought I am joining peace with peace. So also the whole perception that asking powerful questions and shall we say rejecting something is not positive action, is completely a privileged notion. So I see Ashoka as privileged positivity, and I see Thiruma or Ambedkar or Ayodhya Das as questioning that notion of positivity itself. So it's fascinating.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dhruv. That's fantastic, and we'll if you can come back to this topic later. We have a bunch of questions coming up. But before we go into that, you spoke about the music itself needs to be given that space to move. Needs to be given that space. So how has that been for you? Coming from a Carnatic sort of which is sort of has a perception of being very rigid, has a perception of strict conformity to certain standards. How has that movement been for you?
I mean, it's not perception. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, very bluntly put, I would have been uncomfortable saying this even probably in the early days of my so-called activism, to be honest, because I have baggage too, right? I mean, I've learned this form from age of 6. I probably know this better than I know anything else. But the fact is, it is a stuffed box. Let's be very clear about it. Okay? I love it. I'll sing it till I die. But I can't run away from this fact that it is a stuffed box. Is there beauty inside the box? Of course there is. It's still stuffed, right? So for me to, shall we say, shed some of the messes, I'll still say shedding, I wouldn't say shed, has been to a large extent actually nothing I really planned for, to be honest, very truthfully. It's something that just happened one after another. It first started at a very, very internal level of the form. I mean, I was looking at it, I was not looking at the politics of the society or nothing. To me, it was just a notion of, what am I singing? This whole performative notion that I'm having. And I started getting very uncomfortable because I felt that the performative actually destroys the music. The performative that everybody loves and says, I love a kacheri, to me, I felt just kills the music actually. So where is the music was my hunt. So it started with deconstructing that notion of the performative. So my journey begins very purely aesthetic notions. So when you deconstruct it, the question to me was very simple. Does the music still exist? If it didn't exist, it doesn't deserve to exist, in my opinion. Very simple. Because if it is stuck by the performative, it's only the transaction that is determining its existence. To me, that's problematic. Transaction is built on something, right? Transaction cannot be the core of something's value. We're almost getting into economics here, but nevertheless. But that's where the journey began. And then very soon I realized I was within the scope of social questions and political questions. So the movement began from there and then moved to content, moved to person, moved to identity, moved to space, moved to participation, and then went beyond the music world itself to the larger cultural questions that we have. That's been pretty much the trajectory.
Right, okay. We've got a couple of questions sort of related to this from our members. Shatru is asking, has your activism affected your relationship with your family and others? Maybe that's also something, when we spoke earlier, when we started off, we said, you come from a family of heavyweights, but that has hit on you that heavily also.
Well, I mean, it has. I mean, the truth is, well, it has, right? How can it not? I mean, let's be very clear. My father was a wonderful person, but I mean, to just give you, just in a nutshell, if I will tell you what what the politics of my home was, my politics of my home was where people would say Ambedkar actually never wrote the constitution. It was written by T.T. Krishnamachari and all the other members, and his name was put on the constitution. Now, that's the politics of my home. They're all wonderful people, by the way. My dad was, but I mean, this is something I've heard 100 times in my home, 100 times, told by my cousins and everybody else. So is there a problem? I mean, there's discomfort. I know there's discomfort. Probably there's not much confrontation because they don't want to get into a squabble. But of course, there's discomfort. There's murmurs. There's people. There are people who don't talk to me, of course. So, I mean, but that's not, I don't think that's a big deal. I mean, that's privilege too talking, right? Because I don't think it's a big deal as a privilege. I mean, if I came from an environment where that mattered to my own existence, I probably deal with it very differently. But I have the arrogance of privilege to say, you know what, so be it. It's okay if I've made a few people who unfriended me. But I don't think personally, it's created a discomfort, but I've not been so deeply worried by it. But I have to say that the reason also for that is, most importantly, and if I don't say that, has been my immediate family. Whether it is Sangeeta Shivkumar, whether it's my daughters, my mother, my brother, my sister-in-law. I mean, they are very much part of the conversations that we have. Not that we necessarily agree with each other, but that strength is huge for me.
Okay, fantastic. I think we'll go back to, so you spoke about that activism. So where is the where did you worked with Urur, Olcott Kuppam, Tiruvizha, and then you lent your voice to the Ennur, the Kottalayar and all those things. So where is this sense of social justice slash?
Clash, you said. Sorry, I lost you there. Go again.
No, where is the social? What drove you? What their influences you had? People like made you want to do it, and then we'll get into. And you spoke about privilege. So there's an interesting question here from a member. Do you feel it's paradoxical that you campaign exclusively for Dalit rights by insisting that people pass the mic on to Dalit activists and people, but then your voice seems to get highlighted a lot more?
That's I think a very important question. That's fundamentally one of the problems of talking about caste from caste privilege, or a white person speaking about African American rights, or a man speaking about feminism. Very simply, they're all the same problems, right? First, I'm not going to run away from the fact that my existence is problematic in the caste discourse. It's just the truth. Now, does that mean now? Why is the mic given too much to me? Primarily because of my privilege, because of everything. So how does one negotiate that? That is an anti-caste with upper caste, whatever, how you want to say it, anti-caste Brahmin or whatever. Now, how does that person negotiate that power, yet make sure that they are not always there? Do I have a correct answer to that? I don't have a correct answer to that. I don't. But which is why I think it's very good that I'm called out. It's very good that I'm called out. Very good I'm told, at this point of time, I think you should keep quiet for a while. Okay? I think it's good because sometimes I just don't know. That's the truth. Because the person with privilege does not know when they are actually, not just, shall we say, there is a difference between giving, how do you say this? Difference between being the person who is making the discourse more visible, okay, and then at some point becoming the discourse.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, where is the line drawn there? Do we actually know it? No. And it's very easy for you to flip there very, very often. So therefore, it is a problem. But at the same time, I don't accept, okay, the notion that the privileged don't have a role to play in also participating. That I don't accept, because I think it's important for us to change. It's important for other privileged people to listen to this conversation too.
Yeah,
now, if I can enable that conversation, that is also an important part of the conversation. So I would reject the point of saying that you have no space here. I would say I have a space, but I have to acknowledge that me having that space is a problem, and constantly learn from it. Constantly step back, learn from it, know when to shut up. And when I don't shut up, I'm told, please shut up.
Yeah, and also we have to take this conversation outside to our own circles where this conversation is not happening.
Absolutely, that's what I meant. I mean, it's very important, right? Very clear. Let's also very clear. Everybody has an audience. Activism is also about audiences. I know this sounds very reductionist, but it's very true, right? When we are talking about transforming people, it's just about allowing people to open their minds. Forget about transformation, right? Every act or every statement has different audiences. And I won't argue the right or wrong. You can say, no, the person should listen to all voices. But that is not how society is built, unfortunately. Let's also recognize that problem. So therefore, each of us are trying to grapple with the different audiences. And that's where it's slippery, because multiple audiences started listening to only certain voices, right? So that's why you have to constantly negotiate this. When when are you accentuating a voice? When are you? Which is why, for example, I want to say one correction. I never speak for the Dalit. Okay, that's one thing I just want to say. I speak as myself, for myself, so that other people who are like me can probably listen to what I'm saying. That's all I do. I cannot speak. I dare not speak for the Dalit.
Right. We have Ashwin on waiting to ask you a question. I think it sort of continues where you stop here. Ashwin, do you want to go on?
Yeah, hey, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Hi, Ashwin.
Hey, hi. We are all a big fan of you in the family, so just wanted to let that know.
Thank you very much.
Sure. So my question is on the Me Too movement, right? And you're as male and one who represents a conservative art culture, right? So what the movement to a large extent has called out is people with stature to disassociate with the accused, right? So is that possible at all? And even in the event of that happening,
No, can I just say, is what possible? I lost you there. Sorry. Just say it again.
to in as part of the Me Too movement, the expectation is to disassociate with the accused, right? People of
Okay, got it.
stature, right?
Mhm.
And I believe that's not going to be that easy, especially the more you hear people, big celebrities coming out. It's not going to be easy, and in more so in a conservative art culture, and we see that happening, right? How
Correct.
difficult, or the other question always comes up is there's also even a criminal is expected to be given dignity of work, right? So with all these being there, how does one as a celebrity, right, one who wants to carry forward the moment to be supportive of the victim, how do you take it forward, or what could be done for the victims here?
Well, I think it's a very complicated question. First, you're asking a man that question.
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
again. So let me start with the last. This whole idea of dignity of even the criminal. I want to just address that question, right? You see, the whole Me Too movement in India is of a very different nature than say anywhere else, and especially in say the so-called classical forms, they come in a different form. It's not about right or wrong. There are multiple reasons why they have come in the form they have. Now, do you think that things will change? I don't think. I think the conservatism here we're talking about is not just got to do with this form. It's got to do with our own whole country. We are absolutely a misogynist country, and it so sounds like a generalization, and people will say, "How dare you generalize?" But I think inside, somewhere, we are all pretty patriarchal, and misogyny is also normalized that we don't recognize it. So what we're also asking for is a transformation, is a change holistically in the way we see multiple genders and multiple sexes. So now, do you think there will be a time? This is an hypothetical. I don't know, but I think this is a slow process. How I would like to see it. My little experience is that we somehow cannot expect something to change like that. I think it's going to take. There are two things. One is response to say an accusation that has come. Today, say we have X number of accusations that have come from women about X number of artists. Now that's what you have. Then the question is, where is the system and environment changing? Now, I think that's also an important question we should ask, because unless we address that, the former is never going to be addressed. We think we set up on ICC, everything is solved. No, it's not going to function at all, because we have an unempathetic environment. We are insensitive. We are always suspicious that the woman is cooking up the story so that she wants to bring down this star. We don't create safe spaces for conversations. So therefore, when you don't create an environment that is going to make changes to the way people think and feel and understand, there are no conversations about it. Tell me how many musicians have serious conversations. Musicians are scared to use the word sexual, let alone anything else. Okay? So, I mean, this puritanical mumbo-jumbo nonsense that we parade, the problem starts right there, right? So, we have to change the way we talk about this, change the way we talk about our society. So, if you want the Me Too movement to actually go somewhere in a larger sense, there needs to be conversations, private, public, education. And let's be honest, many people actually don't get it still. Most men don't understand what sexual harassment is, what does it really mean. They don't even understand that it is the woman who decides whether it is harassment or not. Fundamentally, it's not there. The man just doesn't get it. So we have to build this very slowly and carefully. Rather, it has to be built. It's by women, and the rest of us need to support it. Build a change that is happening, and then I think we can go somewhere. As far as the powerful who have not been, shall we say, moved to the margins, my fundamental problem is also they've not even apologized for it. Let's start there. There's not even a sorry. that I could be wrong. Let's even say that they believe that they didn't do anything. Let's even presume that in some case. But the fact that a woman is saying that what you did was abuse for me, that the man doesn't think he can say, I'm really sorry. I will seek help for myself to understand this better. Now, even that movement has not taken place. And let's, that if that step takes place, then we are moving somewhere, at least, right?
Fantastic. Thank you, Ashwin. I think that opened up a lot of things. We've got another question here from Raghavendra. Raghavendra, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep, I can hear you.
Yes. Thanks for all the music and the activism. So it's an inspiration.
Thank you.
So I have a question, which is slightly perhaps from what you've been talking, slightly away. So I'm thinking like from a performing arts standpoint, is there like an art form which is truly pan-Indian? So, I think one of the focus of the Sangh Parivar project, in my understanding, is for them to have this homogeneous single cultural identity. So is there like a secular alternative to this pan-Indian cultural alternative? And should we even strive towards that? I mean, the closest I can think of is film music. So I don't know. I would be really interested.
So I think it's a very important question, but I'm going to tweak what you said a little bit. So the RSS construction, I'm going to just talk about it straight, okay? Let's not hide behind anything, because they are, within quotes, they call themselves a cultural organization, right? So this pan-Indian idea of theirs was not a single art form idea, okay? The pan-Indian idea was a psychological, cultural idea. So the homogenized notion they are creating is ideational, for which they have tapped into multiple things. Of course, there are the non-negotiable ideas that are their foundation. Built on that is they use the local dynamics or the local culture or the local identities in every location to accentuate this monolithic ideations, right? Now, they've done this not today and yesterday, they've done it for about 70 years. Let's first recognize that. They have shakas in every village. Okay, so they create, so what do you create? You create chants, you create habit. The thing about culture is actually mostly habit. I know it sounds really horrible when I say it, but the truth is culture is habit. You do this continuously for generations, it's your culture. Simple as that. Now, whether it's beautiful or not is a different question, okay? It's a very different question. Now, they create habit. They've created habit of violence, violent thoughts, violent notions, all based on a certain ideological framework that we can disagree with or agree with. That's a different thing. Have we done this? We are the biggest failure of the Indian Constitution as people. We have done zilch, is the answer. From the time of independence. I mean, who the hell understands words like secular? Even words like equality, nobody understands that word. Let's be very clear. You either feel it or you don't feel it. The fact is, have we created a pan-Indian cultural ideas? Could be songs, could be theatre, and it need not be megaphones like Bollywood. They can be specific. In Tamil Nadu, North Tamil Nadu may have a different whole set of things you use, South. But have we created foundational notions that we want to say that every child must be instilled in? No. I mean, I would ask, why was the Ashokan edicts not translated, at least the ones on the most important values, and taught to every one of us in our schools in different languages? It could have been. We have Ashoka everywhere in our constitution, right? So the fact is, we don't have, we've not created a culture of Indian democracy. We've not created a culture of Indian constitution, especially the preamble. We have not created a culture. And is there a possibility to do that? Absolutely. We need hubs in every district and village that creates music, dance, theatre and songs, and creates habit out of saying, we believe in equality, we believe even more in equity, we believe in embracing religions. I don't like the word tolerating. We believe in embracing the non-believer. We believe in diversity of people, of everything. We should be singing these songs. You know, how do I know the shlokas that I was taught when I was a kid? I don't know the meaning of even one of them. Because I just did it 100 times for so many years. I'll do it now. We should create a habit of this.
I don't think it's necessary that we have to have one unified thing or anything, right? We spoke about, and that's one of the beauties of being human at any level, is that we come from very contradictory. We shouldn't be existing if you go by things. So we should hold these multiple things as dear as we hold one unified thing. I think we should make space for that, rather than saying this is the one culture or this is the one.
No, I mean, I think culture is always a wrong word. It's cultures, right?
Yeah.
But then also, Nadika, aren't we, okay, having said that, but aren't we also saying that there are certain ethical values that need to be traveled around across the cultures? Is that also what we are saying?
Yeah.
Is that something we have to think about? Which is why I use the Constitution, because as problematic as it is, I think there are threads to it, which also allows for contestation. You can argue what equity and what is equality. We may not agree with it. But the notion of equity being as some way essential to our conversation is what I'm talking about.
I mean, yeah, fine. I completely buy it, but I think this conversation that we need a pan-Indian art form or a pan-Indian cultural concept, I think we should, and that's one of the parts of our constitution also, is that we find these diversity also a sort of a great aspect of our civilization in that sense.
Yeah, but I think we also have to be a little honest here and say that even every government in power has thought of culture only monolithically.
Yeah.
So it's not something that has appeared in the last 8 years of our post-independence. Let's also accept the fact that monolithic cultural elitism has been a habit of Indian bureaucracy and political world.
True. And that's something that we have to, as citizens, I think we should resist at any and all levels.
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay. I think we have one more question. Mangla Dilip agrees with us, says, I think it's also important to acknowledge that much like gender itself, this is with the Me Too question, gender itself, assault and harassment also is not binary.
Is not what?
It's not binary.
Yes.
And uniformity in values, Manoj and I are saying the Constitution does not address uniformity starting with the preamble. I'm not sure I understand it, but yeah, we can discuss that. How do we say this? I don't know what this person wants to address. There's no such thing as national singular monolithic culture. We agree.
Yeah, I think we agree. There's no. I know. By the way, the Constitution is not a perfect document too. Let's also be very clear there.
Okay. Krishna, I've been wanting to ask you this. I want to hear the edict words in your voice. Would you like to sing for us, please?
Oh God, just now. 1 second. I hope I have it here. Oh, I may have it here. Just give me 1 second if you don't mind.
Perfect. No, that's fine.
I'll just get it out of here. Yes. Okay, here you go. Muni se paja mama atha pajaye इच्छामि हकों क्योंति सवेन हित सुखेन हिदलोकिका पाललोकिकायं मुनिसे नास्ति एदिशं दानं यादिशं धर्मदानं धर्म संस्तवो धर्म संविभागो धर्म संबंधो Sadama Padama Gari. Want to go through, right through?
Yes, please.
gani sariga mariga pada ta pada sarita samavayo eva sadhu ta samavayo eva sadhu kyonti dhammam srunaro Anyasya dhammam srunaro annam annasya dhammam srunaru cha susum se rachaga padasaga padagari sari ma pani sa ni da pada ma pa ma gari ga ततोपच अधुना लधेषु कलिंगेषु तीव्रे धर्मशीलन धर्म कामत धर्मानुषस्ति च देवानापि अससो अस्ति अनुशोचन देवानप्रियस विजिनीति च कालिगानी देवानप्रियस सोऽस्ति अनुशोचन देवानप्रियस विजिनीति च कालिगानी.
Wow. Thank you. That was fantastic. Oh man. Okay, I'm going to take a bit of a break. Shweta has a question for you. Shweta?
Hi, yeah.
Hi, Shweta.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you, because I think the way the Carnatic world is right now, I think we can say that Brahmanism is really just inextricably linked with it, right? There is no, I think, separating Brahmanism from the way the Carnatic world operates right now. So would we then say that teaching and the way this whole Guru Sishya thing happens and how we teach the art, is it not an indoctrination of casteism? Like how do we separate Brahmanism from teaching the art?
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, you're bang on. There can be no. It's absolutely true. The way the art form is taught, everything about its construction is casteist. But it's not the art form only, right? It is the community that is holding the art form, right? So these are the conversations in their homes. So let's be clear that the art form is taught in this manner because of the participants in those art forms, right? So there are multiple ways you can challenge this. One is if the participants change, if there is a diversity in participants, then will the way it is being taught also change. If the content of what we are saying is changed, then will the teaching also change. So I think the only way to address this is in kind of a multi-pronged way, right? It's about people, it is about content, it is about space. Where is it performed? Who's speaking about it? So therefore, I think if we want this to change, we have to address all these things of who are the holders of it, who are the caretakers of it. Teaching is a certain way. Of course, the classroom is inoculating casteism. It is no doubt about it. The truth is also most people even don't recognize it because, like they would say within courts, we don't discuss caste at home. Of course, you don't discuss caste at home. How would you discuss in the classroom, right? Therefore, I think the only way to change is to each of us work within our own spheres on one of these aspects or multiple of these aspects. If you teach music, can you change the way your classroom is? Let's start there. Let's start some very, very fundamental things. Can we change the nature of the classrooms? Can we change the way we are giving opportunities for musicians? Can we change the way where the art is being performed? Can we disturb? You need to disturb things to make anything change. They have to be disturbed. All sense of comfort needs to be knocked down. And I think if each of us can do that in our own little level, there is, I'm a very strong believer in many small things actually achieving far more than one big thing. So I think there are many small things a lot of us can do, and they will they will be accumulative. It will take time.
I think Mangala has a question that sort of is coming off from that. Mangala?
Hi, yes.
Hi, Mangala.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this, Nadika. You're doing a great job, and Krishna, I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
And you really touched my heart just now. I had a question regarding Carnatic music in general. I am a long-time patron of Carnatic music, and as you get more and more into activism, you tend to be unable to separate everything from caste, right? So this is a question I have been pondering a lot with, because Carnatic music historically has been a very exclusive arena, and DBA folks obviously have not had an access to this. I know that you have done certain YouTube videos where you kind of highlighted certain artists who are probably not part of the mainstream Carnatic circle. But other than that, is there actually space for DBA folks in Carnatic music in general? And like, would they even want a space in a circle where they were excluded from for so long? And if they don't want the space, and if we are continuing this tradition as artists and as patrons, are we perpetuating this exclusivity?
Okay, I'll just tell you. I'll tell you just. I mean, you just triggered a very. There's a little trap over here, and this is a problematic trap. I don't have a solution for the trap. I'll just tell you the trap. So, first of all, are there people of other castes who are learning this form? The answer is absolutely yes. You go to any government music college in Tamil Nadu, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who are learning this art form who are not part of any privileged caste community. The question is, where do they go? What happens to them? Now, there is a complete disconnect with this world, with the world which is mainstream, world like ours, right? There is no, and this is something actually through our foundation, we were going to start a project just in March 2020 to create a bridge, a mentorship program where we had selected actually students, but COVID came and everything is now up in the air. We'll have to just wait and see how we can take. But the idea is, can we create? So the question is, say you are a Bahujan, you're talented, you want to take, you don't know where to go. So first there are people. Now you could ask the second question, should they be interested? Is singing this form also a kind of, is it even when a Bahujan who loves Carnatic music starts singing it, is there also an ugly indoctrination happening, right? You could ask that question. First of all, should you and I be answering that question is also problematic. Isn't it that individual who should be answering that question? But nevertheless, it's intellectually debated also, right? Just for debate, because it's a problematic space. So here you have an art form that refuses to change. Okay, here you have activism that says there are these people who love this art form, so let's create a bridge for them to learn this art form. Now, how does one reconcile this problem? You see the issue here, right? It's a very dynamic issue. So, which is why in my own little way, is for me to say I constantly keep disturbing this because I think this is problematic. So whether it's in content, whether it is where it is performed, I keep playing with this. At the same time, saying, can we create bridges? Now, it's still not perfect. It is still an unequal problem. But I'm saying that first, let's not presume that people or Bahujans are not interested in the art form, which is not a right presumption at all. You can go to Kerala, you can go to Tamil Nadu, go to the places where mainstream kacheris don't happen and people learn this music. They probably become teachers in their village or in a little government school somewhere and take classes. Some of them could be extraordinarily talented, but just that they didn't get the platform. So that's true, but this is also true. So if you find a better way to deal with it, go ahead and do it. Don't tell me, just do it.
I think we have Sriram Krishnan having a very similar question. Sriram?
Hi. Hi, Krishna. Thank you
Hi,
for doing
Sriram.
this. So I had a similar question to what Mangala was asking, but a different dimension. We see this Carnatic music taking very mainstream media attention, right? In the Margazhi festival, you see that all the channels are getting this media attention to this. Apart from Villupattu, I remember in my childhood I used to see this Villupattu on TV by Armugam. Apart from that, I have not seen any other art form getting this mainstream like slots where people can listen to it and enjoy these things, right? So how do we ensure that, apart from like bringing other people into this Carnatic music, how do you ensure that other art forms are also becoming mainstream, right?
So actually, this is not a Carnatic music problem. This is a social problem. It's a cultural problem. So I mean, this is what caste is, right? That it creates an image of it being the identification of different kinds of so-called sophistications, including aesthetic sophistication. You know, the biggest problem in the field that I grapple with, which is an aesthetic field, is most people do not recognize aesthetics as discrimination. When you think fluorescent pink is ugly, is it something you feel, or is it a discriminative notion? Can you ask that question?
But at least like
No,
I
no.
feel like from the point that you mentioned, which is like it's the social problem, right? But from within the media, like even News Minute also can like people who are there in the media at a high level, right? People can
No, you're
influence
saying
like
that
taking
they
other.
can. No, I agree with you. I'm just telling you that you please don't think media is perfect. Media is as messed up, right? So it's not, media is not some not going to give you so same people like you and me are in media, boss. They are not people coming from some other planet. I mean, just look at our media. I mean, just do one Twitter scroll and you know what our media is. So let's not just think that they suddenly will solve all of. No. So media is full of upper caste, first of all. Okay. Now, whether that's a truth, that's a valid. So now, even the, shall we say, even the progressive come with certain aesthetic habituation. This is what I want to tell you, that the progressive world is full of aesthetic discriminators. The activist world is full of people, upper caste activist world is full of people who don't recognize their aesthetic discrimination. And I want to say this out there. Your politics may be right, but when you don't realize that you feel something, and that feeling is actually because of something that's implanted in you, and because it's not literal, you don't feel it, you can't change. What I think, I will tell you my own transformation, that I've used this many times and I'll say it again. When one day, I mean, we do a collaboration with Kooth, with Katte Kooth, with Rajagopal sir. And I remember the first time I heard it, Kooth's music was noise to me. It was noise, actually noise. In my ear, it was noise. Now I hear it as music. What happened? It's the same thing that is being rendered, boss. Something happened. So even your notion of pitch, beauty, sound is muddled. Right? So can we stay alive to this as a community, as society? And then Pushpavanam Kuppuswamy will be, you know, I was just, today there's a Twitter thread, you know, about Indian classical women voices, and it had full of only Hindustani musicians. So I put a response saying, I think you should have more Carnatic musicians, because they said, they used the word classical, which I wouldn't, but they did anyway. I then thought and said, if the Carnatic musicians in Tamil Nadu were asked to put, can you put a list of great voices in Tamil Nadu? How many people include Pushpavanam Kuppuswamy in that? They would not. So there are grades and grades of the same thing operating, and that is why. So I think if this, I agree with you that platforms that are democratic, that are open, should do more. But I think that we all need to do more. You know, let's not put the onus on these platforms. That's all.
Okay.
Thanks, Sriram.
And there's a larger conversation also to be had with what is classic and what is not classic. You know, and that's
I mean, I disown that word entirely. I think the classical is a fraud word.
exactly. I don't know why we think, and because we know the history of Carnatic that borrows so much from so many other art forms, and how do we say this is classic? And,
Yeah, absolutely.
so we have Krishnaswamy. I think this will be the last question for the day. Krishnaswamy, you are up next.
Hi, Krishna.
Hi.
Yeah. So I had the privilege of being recognized as a duplicate of you in many places. Thanks to my nose, I think.
I must tell you, I still have a little bit more hair than you, but go ahead.
So, no, mine actually are two questions. One is that is there any particular reason, choice you make for the what music you bring on to the edicts? Because the edicts have different themes. For example, there are things on about animal, saying about medicines,
Correct.
about justice, and so on. So That's one. Then the
Okay.
other one is whether you would be doing all the edicts, including the Greek and the Aramaic ones. I mean, there in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but maybe whether I'm sure its translations are possible.
It's in those scripts. Let me just correct you there. It's in those scripts.
Yeah, scripts.
Yeah. So the first thing is,
I think that,
to answer your first question is, look, I'm just taking the first step to this. So I'm still the babe on the block. Okay. So I'm still learning. I would ideally, if you ask me what's my next collection of edicts which I'll bring, I want to take the edicts that talk about multiple faiths. Multiple religions. That's what I would like to do as the next collection of edicts. Okay. Am I planning to do all of them? At this point, what my mind is, Ashoka University are now collaborating with me, so we have to have this discussion together. But in my mind, I would say those edicts that have political, social, and administrative import.
okay, yeah.
Right? Those are the ones that I'm looking at. I mean, there are about more than 120 different edicts. 14 of them are repeated in multiple places. I would say about 40 or 50 cover these aspects. Some of them are even dedications. You know, there are cave edicts which are dedications to somebody. I don't think I will be rendering them because I don't think they really have any. So some are very local, right?
Okay.
So if I keep those out, I would like to see, let's just say the larger themes, the larger ideas that the edicts have. That's the direction I would like to go in. And choosing the ragas, you know, many times people ask this question, you know, how do you choose a raga? I mean, is it the meaning? Is it the sound? It's very difficult, Krishnaswamy, to say. I mean, I will not say it's only the meaning. I will definitely say it's also the sound. You know, when you read it, sometimes you start singing it. That's the truth. That's the truth. I take Muni Se Pajan, I just start singing it. So, and then, you know, it just flows. It works. Sometimes it, you know, I first tuned the first verse in Deva Gandhari. And then I just saw it again. I kept it away for a week. I didn't sing it. Then I took it back the next day and I sang it in Kapi. It's not like said, okay, for this mood, I will choose Kapi. I don't think it works that way. It's a feel. It's a feel. It's just you have a feeling. Yeah, you have a handle. I mean, you know the meaning, you know the sound, and you just get a handle of it.
Yeah, nice. Thanks. Look forward to the others. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Krishnaswamy. I think, Krishna, we're also sort of getting close to time. So I'm just going to ask you one last question, and then we'll release you to the world.
Thank you.
What's next after Sebastian and Sons? Can we expect another book?
Yes, I'm supposed to be working. I hope my publisher is not listening to this conversation. I've not done bit of work. But I think the Ashoka edicts are in the direction. So we are, the next book, I hope that I would get it ready by next year, is on some of the constitutional symbols of India. So we picked 5 symbols: the flag, the anthem, the motto, the preamble. I missed one. I don't know which one. Flag, motto. Okay, I've missed one. I just don't get it. So we're taking 5 of these symbols and trying to see how, trying to talk about them as a citizen, as a person of today, and how does one relate to each of those symbols. That's what is my next book, actually. So I'm supposed to be writing it right now, which I have not. But I hope by next year we should be able to get it out.
Yes, fantastic. I hope I shall look forward to it. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for singing for us.
No, it's a pleasure, Nadika. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have finally met you.
Likewise. Thank you to all the TNM members who joined in and asked questions. And thank you for TNM for hosting this conversation. The video will be available for the members next week. So till then, we'll bid goodbye to Krishna, and we hope to cross paths again sometime soon.
Absolutely. And thank you all. Thank you, News Minute, for everything that you do. And thank you all, Ragamalika, Naveen, everybody else, Dhanya, all of you, the whole team. Thanks a ton. Bye.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thanks,
thank you, Nadika. And I hope we can see all of you on the TNM forums. Krishna, you should join us there as well. We can continue the conversation over there. Thanks,
Absolutely.
everyone. I'm ending the live now.
Thanks a ton.
All right. Thank you.
See you. Bye.